She starved so her siblings could eat, until a duke kneeled and said, "You fed my heart." The bread was still warm when Alara divided it into 3 pieces, one for Thomas, one for little Mary, and nothing for herself. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the gnawing emptiness that had become her constant companion, a hollow ache she'd learned to call friend. She watched her younger siblings devour their portions with the desperate gratitude of the starving, their eyes briefly bright before dimming again with the knowledge of what their eldest sister sacrificed. Thomas, barely 12, reached for her hand across their crude wooden table. "You haven't eaten in 3 days, Alara." His voice cracked on her name. She smiled, that terrible, beautiful smile that cost her everything, and lied. "I ate earlier, at the market." But they all knew. In the corner of their crumbling cottage, little Mary began to cry, because children always know when love tastes like starvation. Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The cottage door burst open with a violence that sent Mary scrambling behind Alara's skirts. 3 men filled the doorway, 2 in livery she didn't recognize, and one whose presence seemed to devour all the air in the room. He was tall, dark-haired, with eyes the color of winter storms, and a jaw carved from aristocratic disdain. His greatcoat was worth more than their cottage, worth more than their lives, probably. "Miss Alara Thornwood?" His voice was cultured, cold, each syllable precisely delivered like a surgeon's cut. She stood, swaying slightly from the hunger she pretended didn't exist, and positioned herself between this stranger and her siblings. "Who's asking?" "Alexander Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft." He said it as though the title should make her curtsy. It didn't. "I've come with a proposition that will save your family from the streets, or destroy you trying. The choice, I'm told, should be yours, though we both know desperation allows for no true choice at all." Thomas moved to stand beside her, his thin shoulders squared in futile defiance. The Duke's gaze flickered to him, then to Mary, then, most devastatingly, to the 3 pieces of bread on the table, to Alara's trembling hands, to the dark circles beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and surrendered meals. Something shifted in his expression, something that might have been recognition, or pity, or pain. "Your father," the Duke said quietly, "owed mine a debt, a significant one, £10,000 to be exact." The number hit Alara like a physical blow. £10,000? They didn't have £10. They barely had 10 shillings. "My father has been dead for 6 months, Your Grace." Her voice was steady, though her body was not. "Whatever debt he owed died with him." "Legally speaking, you're correct." The Duke took a step forward, and she caught the scent of bergamot and something darker, leather, perhaps, or secrets. "Morally speaking, however, your father made promises, promises that involved you." The world tilted. Alara gripped the table's edge. "Explain, now." Alexander Ashford reached into his coat and withdrew a letter. The paper was yellowed, the seal broken, but her father's handwriting was unmistakable. He handed it to her without ceremony. "My dearest Alexander," it began, and Alara's stomach dropped because her father had never been dear with anyone except his children. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and my debts have fallen upon my daughter Alara's shoulders. I know what I ask is unconscionable. I know you will hate me for this request, but my children will starve without intervention, and you are the only man I trust to protect them while appearing to claim them. Marry Alara, not for love. God knows she deserves better than arrangement born of desperation. But marry her? Pay my debts through this union, and in doing so, give her siblings the life my failure stole from them. She is brilliant, fierce, and far too proud to accept charity. But a marriage contract? That she might accept. That she might survive. I know you've sworn never to marry. I know why. But this girl has been dying by inches to keep her family alive, and if anyone understands the weight of sacrifice, it's you. Save her, Alexander, even if she hates you for it, especially if she does. The letter continued with legal details, property arrangements, financial settlements for Thomas and Mary, but Ilara couldn't read past the betrayal crystallizing in her chest. Her father had sold her. No, worse. Her father had packaged her suffering into a marriage proposal to a duke who clearly wanted this arrangement as much as she wanted another day of starvation. Get out! Her voice was barely a whisper. Miss Thornwood! Get out! The shout tore from her throat, raw and ragged. Little Mary started crying again. Thomas grabbed Ilara's arm, but she shook him off. How dare you come here with your titles and your pity and your... She gestured at his impeccable appearance, at the casual wealth draped across his frame like armor. You think you can buy me like livestock? You think I'm so desperate I'll... Yes, Alexander Ashford said simply. I think you're exactly that desperate. I think you've been starving yourself to feed your siblings. I think you've sold everything worth selling, begged from every neighbor willing to help, and exhausted every option except the one I'm offering. I think your pride is killing you, and I think if I leave right now, you'll be dead within the month. The truth of it struck her silent. He continued, his voice gentler now, almost kind. Your father was my closest friend. He saved my life during the war, carried me 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his leg. I owed him everything. And when he wrote to me 6 months ago, explaining his illness and his fears for you, I made him a promise. What promise? Ilara demanded, hating how her voice broke. That I would protect his children, all of them. Alexander's gray eyes held hers, even from themselves. I don't need protection, Your Grace. I need... She stopped because what she needed was impossible. She needed her father back. She needed the small fortune he'd gambled away trying to cure her mother's illness years ago. She needed not to feel her ribs through her dress, not to see Thomas's collarbones jutting beneath his thin shirt, not to watch Mary's cheeks hollowing week by week. You need 10,000 pounds, Alexander finished, and a home that doesn't have holes in the roof, and food that doesn't require choosing which child eats, and a future that isn't measured in how long you can survive on broth and prayer. He wasn't wrong. God help her. He wasn't wrong. The marriage would be in name only, he continued, pulling out another document, a contract by the look of it. You'd have your own apartments at Ravenscroft Manor, freedom to pursue your interests, your education, whatever you wish. Thomas will attend the finest schools. Mary will have governesses, music lessons, everything a young lady requires. You'll want for nothing, except love, Ilara said bitterly, except choice, except dignity. Something flickered across Alexander's face, pain, perhaps, or memory. I think we're past dignity, Miss Thornwood. She wanted to refuse. Every fiber of her being screamed to throw this arrogant duke and his contract out into the rain. But then Mary's small hand slipped into hers, and Thomas moved closer, and she felt the weight of their survival pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Why? She asked quietly. Why would you shackle yourself to a stranger? To someone so far beneath your station that London will mock you for it? Because your father asked me to. Alexander's jaw tightened. And because I understand what it means to sacrifice everything for duty. I've been doing it my entire life. There was a story there, something dark and wounded lurking beneath his aristocratic composure. But Ilara was too tired, too hungry, too desperate to excavate his secrets. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have conditions. Name them." "Thomas and Mary's future is guaranteed, in writing, regardless of what happens to me. If this marriage ends, if you decide I'm not worth the trouble, they remain protected." "Agreed. I want control over my own finances. An allowance that's mine to manage as I see fit." "Done. And I want the truth, Your Grace." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with the last remnants of her pride. "Why did you swear never to marry? What happened to you that makes this arrangement tolerable?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "I was engaged once, to a woman I loved more than breathing. She died 3 days before our wedding. Died because of me, because of choices I made, because I was too arrogant to see the danger until it was too late." His voice had gone flat, emotionless, but his hands clenched at his sides. "I swore I'd never subject another woman to the destruction that follows my name. That's why this arrangement suits me, Miss Thornwood. You won't love me. I won't destroy you. We'll both survive." The honesty of it stole her breath. "1 month," Ilara heard herself say. "Give me 1 month to see if I can find another way. If I can't, I'll marry you." "You have 3 days," Alexander countered. "After that, the creditors your father owed will come calling. They won't be as generous as I'm being." 1 week, 5 days. Deal. The word tasted like surrender. Alexander Ashford extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ilara took it. His grip was warm, steady, and felt nothing like the trap she knew it was. "I'll return in 5 days, Miss Thornwood. I suggest you prepare your siblings for the change. And for God's sake—" He reached into his coat and withdrew a purse heavy with coin, pressing it into her palm. "Eat something. I won't have my future wife collapsing at the altar from starvation. It would be terrible for my reputation." Then he was gone, sweeping out into the rain with his servants, leaving only the purse and the contract and the impossible weight of the choice ahead. Ilara stood frozen until Thomas touched her shoulder. "Ilara, what are we going to do?" She looked at the money in her hand, more than she'd seen in months. Looked at her brother and sister, at their hope and fear and trust. "We're going to survive," she said quietly, "whatever it costs." That night, for the first time in weeks, she bought bread for herself. It tasted like ashes and promises she couldn't keep. The 5 days passed like a fever dream. Ilara tried everything. She went to every neighbor, every distant relation, every merchant who'd once known her father. She begged, bargained, pleaded for loans that would never come. Her father's debts were too large, his creditors too impatient, and her family's name too tarnished by his failures. On the 4th day, a man named Silas Crow appeared at her door. He was not a duke. He wore no fine clothes, spoke no cultured words. But his smile was a blade, and his eyes promised violence. "Miss Thornwood," he purred, blocking her doorway with his bulk. "I represent several gentlemen who had financial arrangements with your late father. We've been very patient, but patience has its limits." "I'm aware of the debts, Mr. Crow." Ilara kept her voice steady. "And I'm arranging payment." "Are you?" He glanced past her, into the cottage, where Thomas was reading to Mary by the weak light of their single candle. "Pretty siblings you have." "Shame if something happened to them while you were busy arranging payment." The threat was crystal clear. "Get away from my house," Ilara said, low and dangerous, "or I'll scream until every neighbor comes running." Scream all you like, sweetheart. Your neighbors know better than to cross me. Silas leaned closer, and she smelled gin and malice on his breath. You've got 24 hours to produce 10,000 pounds. Otherwise, I start collecting in other ways. Maybe that pretty little sister of yours could work off some debt. She's young, but there are men who prefer. Ilara slapped him. The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed through the narrow street. For a moment, Silas Crow simply stared at her, shock rendering him immobile. Then his expression transformed into something murderous. He grabbed her throat, slamming her against the doorframe with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. "You little! Remove your hand from my betrothed, or I'll remove it for you." The voice was cold as winter death. Alexander Ashford stood at the edge of the street, rain dripping from his dark hair, his entire frame radiating lethal intent. He looked nothing like the composed Duke who'd visited 5 days ago. He looked like violence incarnate. Silas released Ilara immediately. "Your Grace, I didn't realize." "You didn't realize attacking a woman in broad daylight might have consequences?" Alexander crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. "You didn't realize threatening children might attract attention? Or perhaps you simply didn't realize I'd arrive early. I was collecting a legitimate debt from my future wife." Alexander's smile was all teeth. "How fascinating, because you see, Mr. Crow, the moment Miss Thornwood agreed to marry me, her father's debts became mine, and I've already settled them. Every last penny." He produced a sheaf of papers from inside his coat, thrusting them at Silas. "These are receipts showing full payment to every creditor your little consortium represents. Your services are no longer required. And if I ever see you near Miss Thornwood or her siblings again, I will ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life regretting it. Do we understand each other?" Silas Crow's face had gone pale. He nodded once, grabbed the papers, and fled into the rain like the coward he was. Ilara sagged against the doorframe, her throat already bruising where Silas had grabbed her. Alexander turned to her, and the fury in his expression transformed instantly to concern. "Let me see," he said quietly, reaching for her neck. She flinched back. "Don't, Ilara." He stopped himself. "Miss Thornwood, please, let me examine the damage." Something about the way he said her name, tentative, careful, as though it were precious, made her relent. She tilted her head back, exposing the red marks already darkening to purple. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I should have killed him." "You paid the debts." Her voice came out hoarse. "You weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. I had a feeling your creditors might not be patient." His fingers ghosted near her throat, not quite touching, assessing the injury with clinical precision. "This needs ice, and you need to be anywhere but here. I can't leave until... The cottage is already being packed." He gestured down the street, where a carriage and several servants waited. "Everything you and your siblings own will be at Ravenscroft Manor by nightfall. You're not spending another moment in this place. You can't just..." "I can, I have, and I will continue to do whatever necessary to ensure your safety, Miss Thornwood, because that's what I promised your father. That's what I promised you when you took my hand 5 days ago." His eyes searched hers. "Unless you've changed your mind. Unless you found another way." She wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell him she'd miraculously secured a fortune, found a benevolent benefactor, discovered some hidden inheritance that would save them all. But Silas Crow's threats still echoed in her ears. His hands still burned on her throat. "I haven't found another way," she whispered. "Then pack your siblings' things. We're leaving within the hour." Thomas and Mary appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Alexander's expression softened as he looked at them, softened in a way that suggested this cold, dangerous duke might have a heart buried somewhere beneath all that aristocratic ice. "Thomas, is it?" he asked gently. Thomas nodded. "I'm Alexander. I knew your father during the war. He was the bravest man I ever served with, and I'm honored to help his family now. Your sister and I are getting married, which means you and Mary will be coming to live at my estate. There are horses and a library with more books than you could read in a lifetime, and rooms so large you could get lost in them. Would you like that?" "Will Ilara be happy there?" Thomas asked, with the blunt wisdom of childhood. Alexander's gaze returned to Ilara. "I'll do everything in my power to ensure it." It wasn't a yes, it wasn't even a promise, really, but it was honest, and somehow that mattered more than pretty lies. "Then I'll like it," Thomas said, "as long as we're together." Mary wrapped her arms around Ilara's waist. "Are you scared?" she whispered. Terrified, Ilara thought. Absolutely terrified. "No," she lied, smoothing her sister's hair. "We're going to be fine. Better than fine." The packing took less than an hour because they owned almost nothing. A few changes of clothes, some books Thomas refused to leave behind, Mary's rag doll, and a miniature portrait of their parents. That was the sum total of the Thornwood family legacy. Ilara stood in the empty cottage one last time, memorizing the space where she'd fought so hard to keep them alive. This place had been poverty and pain, but it had also been theirs. Leaving felt like severing the last connection to the life she'd known. "Ready?" Alexander stood in the doorway, offering his hand. She looked at this lifeline that felt suspiciously like a noose. Then she took it. The carriage ride to Ravenscroft Manor took 3 hours through countryside Ilara had never seen. Thomas pressed his face to the window, marveling at the landscape. Mary fell asleep against Ilara's shoulder, and Alexander sat across from them, silent and watchful, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to pay the debts before the wedding," Ilara said quietly, careful not to wake Mary. "Yes, I did." He didn't elaborate. "Why?" "Because waiting 5 days to ensure your safety was already too long." His gaze met hers. "Because your father saved my life, and this is the least I owe him. Because those bruises on your throat make me want to commit murder, and I needed to act before I did something unforgivable." The honesty of it was startling. Most men would have dressed it up in pretty words, in talk of honor or duty. Alexander Ashford simply admitted to violent impulses and carried on. "Who was she?" Ilara asked. "The woman you lost." Pain flashed across his features. "Catherine, the Earl of Pemberton's daughter. We met at a ball, fell in love like fools in a fairy tale, and planned a life together that seemed perfect on paper." He paused, jaw working. "But I was arrogant. I ignored threats from a rival who wanted her for himself, dismissed warnings from my staff, and 3 days before our wedding, Catherine was thrown from her horse, a horse that had been deliberately spooked by a man I'd insulted. She broke her neck, died instantly." "God," Ilara breathed. "Alexander, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry for me. I don't deserve it." His voice had gone hard. "I deserve the guilt, the nightmares, the knowledge that my pride killed the woman I loved." "What I don't deserve is a second chance at happiness. That's why this arrangement works, Ilara. You won't love me. I won't fail you the way I failed Catherine. That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Wait until you see the manor. It's been called Gothic, oppressive, and haunted. You'll feel right at home. Despite everything, Alara found herself almost smiling back. Ravenscroft Manor appeared through the mist like something from a dark fairy tale, all gray stone and soaring towers surrounded by ancient oaks that seemed to whisper secrets. It was beautiful in a severe, unforgiving way, like its owner. Thomas gasped, "It's a castle!" "Close enough," Alexander agreed. "Built in 1604 by an ancestor who had more money than taste. It has 47 rooms, 6 staircases, and, allegedly, 3 ghosts, none of whom pay rent, I'm afraid." Mary woke up as the carriage stopped. "Are we here?" "We're home," Alexander said, and something about the way he said it, gently, inclusively, as though they already belonged, made Alara's chest ache. The staff waited at the entrance, a stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Yates, a butler named Hughes who looked older than the manor itself, and a small army of servants whose names Alara knew she'd never remember. "Mrs. Yates, please show Miss Mary and Master Thomas to their rooms," Alexander instructed. "Ensure they have everything they need. And send for the dressmaker. Miss Thornwood and her siblings will require entire new wardrobes." "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Yates smiled at the children with surprising warmth. "Come along, dears. Let's get you settled." Thomas hesitated, looking at Alara. "Will you be all right?" "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Go explore. Try not to get lost." Once the children were gone, Alexander turned to her. "Your apartments are in the East Wing, separate from mine, completely private. I thought you might appreciate the space." "Thank you," Alara said, meaning it. "The wedding is scheduled for 3 days from now. Small ceremony, just family and necessary witnesses. Unless you'd prefer something grander." "Small is perfect." The thought of a large wedding made her stomach turn. "Good." He started toward the manor, then paused. "Alara, I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you're terrified and angry and probably regretting every choice that led you here. But I meant what I said. I'll protect you, all of you, whatever it costs." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. "What if protection isn't enough?" she asked quietly. "What if I need more than safety? What if I need—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "What if you need to be seen?" Alexander's eyes held hers. "To be valued as more than a burden or a debt? To be treated as though your thoughts and dreams matter?" "Yes," she whispered. "Then I'll do my damnedest to give you that, too." He offered his arm. "Come on, let me show you your new prison. I promise it has better bars than the last one." Despite everything, Alara laughed. It was a broken, exhausted sound, but it was real. And as Alexander led her into Ravenscroft Manor, into this strange new life built on desperation and dead men's promises, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could survive this after all. She'd survived starvation after all. How much worse could a loveless marriage be? She'd learn soon enough that some prisons were made of silk and guilt, and some were far harder to escape than hunger. The east wing of Ravenscroft Manor was larger than Alara's entire previous life. Her apartments consisted of a bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk, a sitting room with windows overlooking the gardens, a dressing room with empty wardrobes waiting to be filled, and a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub that looked large enough to swim in. It was excessive. It was beautiful. It was utterly wrong. Alara stood in the center of the bedroom, feeling like an imposter in a world she'd never been meant to inhabit. The servants had already unpacked her meager belongings, a task that took all of 10 minutes, and now she was alone with mahogany furniture and velvet curtains and the crushing weight of what she'd agreed to. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting a maid. Instead, Alexander entered, carrying a tray laden with food. Real food, roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and a pot of tea that smelled like heaven. "You haven't eaten since breakfast," he said without preamble, setting the tray on a side table. "Don't argue. I watched you push food around your plate in the carriage. You're going to sit down and consume every bite of this meal, or I'll personally force-feed you like a stubborn child." "How romantic," Elara said dryly. "I'm not trying to be romantic. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to reach the altar." He pulled out a chair, gesturing imperiously. "Sit." She should have refused out of spite, should have thrown his high-handed orders back in his aristocratic face. But the smell of the food was making her dizzy, and her traitorous body had already started moving toward the table. She sat. Alexander watched her like a hawk as she picked up a piece of bread. The first bite nearly made her moan. It was warm, soft, slathered in real butter. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing her stomach would rebel if she devoured it too quickly. "How long?" Alexander asked quietly. "How long what? How long have you been starving yourself?" Elara set down the bread. "That's not your concern. Everything about your well-being is now my concern." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "How long, Elara?" She wanted to lie, wanted to pretend the deprivation had been brief, manageable, nothing worth worrying over. But he'd already seen the truth. Silas Crow had seen it. Everyone who looked at her saw it. 8 months, she admitted, since Father's condition worsened and the medical bills became impossible. I started skipping meals to ensure Thomas and Mary ate. Then I was skipping days. By the end, I was eating maybe once every 3 or 4 days, just enough to stay conscious. Alexander's hands clenched on the table. 8 months. We survived. You barely survived. He leaned forward, intensity burning in his gray eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done to your body? The damage that kind of starvation causes? You could have died, Elara. Your heart could have simply stopped. But it didn't. She met his gaze steadily. I kept us together. I kept them fed. That's all that mattered. And what about you? When were you going to matter? The question struck like a physical blow. Elara faltered. That's not how it works when you're responsible for people. Yes, it is. Alexander's voice gentled. Sacrificing yourself doesn't make you noble, Elara. It makes you dead. And dead women can't protect anyone. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend the choices she'd made, the pain she'd endured. But sitting in this beautiful room, with food in front of her and safety around her, those choices suddenly felt less like strength and more like slow suicide. I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "I know." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The touch was warm, steady, devastatingly gentle. "But you're not alone anymore. Whatever burdens you've been carrying, let me help shoulder them. That's what this marriage is for, Elara. Partnership, protection. Not just for Thomas and Mary, but for you too." Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "I'm not good at accepting help." I noticed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Lucky for you, I'm exceptionally persistent. Now eat, before I make good on my threat to force-feed you." She ate. Every bite felt like surrender and salvation in equal measure. Alexander stayed with her through the entire meal, occasionally refilling her teacup, making dry observations about the manor's quirks and his staff's eccentricities. He didn't push for more confessions, didn't demand gratitude or emotion. He simply existed beside her, solid, present, real. By the time she finished, exhaustion was pulling at her bones. "You should rest," Alexander said, rising. "The dressmaker arrives tomorrow morning. She'll need to fit you for a wedding gown and several day dresses. I know you're not enthusiastic about the wardrobe expansion, but I'm afraid society requires a duchess to look the part." "A duchess?" Elara shook her head. "This is insane." "Completely insane," he agreed. "Welcome to the aristocracy. It only gets worse from here." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elara, thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me enough to eat. For not running when you had the chance. For being brave enough to accept help even when every instinct tells you to face the world alone." His expression softened. "Your father said you were fierce and proud. He was right. But he was also right that you deserved better than slow starvation in a crumbling cottage. I intend to prove it." Then he was gone, leaving Elara alone with a full stomach, a safe room, and the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, Alexander Ashford wasn't the villain in this story. Maybe he was something far more dangerous. Maybe he was hope. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The dressmaker, a formidable woman named Madame Laurent, descended on Ravenscroft Manor with enough fabric to clothe a small army. She poked, prodded, measured, and tutted over Elara's frame with the clinical assessment of a physician examining a patient. "Too thin," Madame Laurent announced. "Far too thin. We'll need to add extra seaming to compensate." "And the color?" She held up a swatch of white silk against Elara's face. "None. Your complexion needs warmth. Ivory, perhaps, or champagne." "Whatever you think best," Elara said wearily. "What I think best is that His Grace start feeding you properly." Madame Laurent pinned a section of fabric at Elara's waist. "A wife who faints at her own wedding reflects poorly on everyone." "I won't faint." "See that you don't." Thomas and Mary were having significantly more fun with their wardrobe overhaul. Thomas had been fitted for proper gentleman's clothing and looked simultaneously thrilled and uncomfortable in his new tailcoat. Mary had been given 3 new dresses and was currently spinning in circles in the nursery, watching the skirts flare. "Do you think Mama would like my new dress?" Mary asked that evening as Elara tucked her into bed. The question pierced Elara's heart. "I think Mama would say you look like a princess." "Do you think Papa would like the Duke?" Elara hesitated. "I think Papa trusted the Duke. That's why he arranged all this. Are you going to love him?" Mary's eyes were too knowing for a child of 6. "I don't know, sweetheart. Love isn't something you can force." "But you could try, couldn't you? He seems nice and sad, like us." Out of the mouths of babes, Elara thought. "Maybe," she allowed. "Someday." "Good," Mary yawned, "because I think he already likes you. He watches you when you're not looking. Papa used to watch Mama that way before she got sick." Elara kissed her sister's forehead, unwilling to examine that observation too closely. "Sleep, love. Tomorrow's a big day." Tomorrow was the wedding. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She wandered through her apartments, touching the fine furniture, the silk curtains, the silver brush and mirror set that had appeared on her vanity. Everything was beautiful. Everything was wrong. A soft knock interrupted her pacing. "Come in," she called, expecting a maid. Alexander entered instead, looking equally sleepless. He wore shirt sleeves and waistcoat, his cravat abandoned, dark hair disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger like this, more human, less Duke, more man. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Wedding eve," Elara said lightly. "Regrets?" She considered lying, considered the polite deflection society demanded. Then she remembered that this man had seen her starving, desperate, bruised, and broken. Lies seemed pointless. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. "Grateful, certainly. Terrified, absolutely. Guilty that my siblings' future security required selling myself into marriage. Angry that the world works this way. Exhausted from pretending I'm not constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Alexander moved into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. What shoe are you expecting? The one where you realize I'm not worth the trouble, where you decide this whole arrangement was a mistake, where I wake up and find myself back in that cottage and this was all a beautiful, terrible dream. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. He closed the distance between them, stopping just close enough that she could feel his presence like heat. Elara, I don't make promises lightly. When I told you I'd protect you, I meant it. When I told you this marriage would give you freedom, I meant it. And when I promise you that I'm not going to abandon you or your siblings, I mean that too. Why? The word came out raw. Why do you care so much? You didn't know us. You owed my father a debt, fine, but this goes beyond that. This is, she gestured helplessly. This is your whole life, your name, your future. Why give all that up for strangers? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then, after Catherine died, I wanted to die too. I didn't because duty demanded I continued. I inherited the dukedom, managed the estates, played the role society expected. But I was hollow, going through the motions of life without actually living. He paused, jaw working. Your father's letter arrived 6 months ago. I almost threw it away. I'd sworn never to marry, never to risk someone else the way I'd risked Catherine. But something about his words, about his fierce, stubborn daughter who was sacrificing everything to keep her family alive, made me reconsider. Why? Because you reminded me what real strength looks like. His eyes met hers. I thought I was strong when I carried soldiers through battlefields. I thought I was strong when I inherited the dukedom and managed an empire's worth of responsibilities. But you were dying by inches and still finding the will to feed your siblings. That's courage I've never possessed. Elara's throat tightened. That's not courage, that's just desperation. It's both. Alexander's voice was soft. And it made me realize that maybe I didn't have to be hollow forever. Maybe I could use my title, my wealth, my position to do something meaningful, to protect people who needed protecting, to honor the man who saved my life by saving his children. You're making yourself sound heroic, Elara said, but this arrangement benefits you too. You get a convenient wife who won't demand love or emotional intimacy. You get to keep your guilt intact, your heart safely locked away. It's a beautiful prison for both of us. Yes, Alexander agreed quietly. It is, but at least it's a shared prison. At least we're not suffering alone. The honesty of it stole her breath. What if... Elara stopped, unsure if she should give voice to the traitorous thought forming in her mind. What if what? What if it doesn't stay a prison? What if we become friends? Something flickered in Alexander's expression. Hope, perhaps, or fear? I'd like that, very much. Just friends, Elara clarified quickly. I'm not asking for more. I'm not asking for romance or love or... I understand. But there was something in his voice that suggested understanding and acceptance were not the same thing. They stood there in the firelight, two broken people trying to forge something survivable from the wreckage of their lives. I should let you rest, Alexander said finally. Tomorrow will be overwhelming enough without adding exhaustion to the mix. Alexander, Elara caught his sleeve as he turned. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For caring when no one else did. For making me eat actual food. A smile. Even if you did threaten to force-feed me. He smiled back, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes. Threats are a courtship tradition in my family. You should hear what my grandmother said to my grandfather. I'm almost afraid to ask. She told him if he didn't propose within the week, she'd run off with a traveling musician just to spite him. They were married 53 years. That's insane? Wonderful? Both? Alexander's smile softened. Marriage is complicated, Elara, even arranged ones, even ones built on debt and desperation. But complicated doesn't mean hopeless. Remember that tomorrow when the priest asks if you'll take me as your husband. Will you remember it too? I'll try. After he left, Elara stood at the window, looking out over the dark grounds of Ravenscroft Manor. Tomorrow, she would become a duchess. Tomorrow, her life would change in ways she couldn't begin to predict. But tonight, she was still just Elara Thornwood, hungry girl, desperate sister, survivor of circumstances that should have broken her. And tomorrow, she'd be all those things and more. Whatever came next, she'd face it the same way she'd faced starvation, with stubborn, fierce, imperfect courage. It would have to be enough. The wedding took place in Ravenscroft's private chapel, a small stone building tucked into the manor's grounds. Morning light filtered through stained glass, painting the pews in jewel tones. Elara stood in the vestibule, wearing the ivory gown Madame Laurent had created. It was simple, elegant, with long sleeves and a high collar that managed to be both modest and beautiful. She felt like an impostor in silk and lace. Thomas straightened his new cravat for the 100th time. "You look beautiful, Elara." "I look terrified." "That too." He took her hand. "But you're the bravest person I know. You'll be brilliant." "I'm walking into a marriage with a stranger. Brilliant seems optimistic." "Has not a stranger anymore," Mary piped up from behind them. She was carrying a basket of flower petals, her duty as unofficial flower girl taken very seriously. "He's the man who saved us. That makes him family." Family. The word should have felt wrong. Instead, it settled into Elara's chest like an ember, warm and fragile. "Ready?" Thomas asked. No, Elara thought, not even close. "Yes," she said. The chapel doors opened. A handful of guests rose, Mrs. Yates, Hughes, a few other servants, and Alexander's solicitor standing as witness. Alexander waited at the altar in formal black tailcoat, looking every inch the duke he was. But when his eyes found hers, something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like reverence. Elara walked down the short aisle on Thomas's arm, her brother giving her away since their father couldn't. Each step felt like approaching a precipice, terrifying and inevitable in equal measure. Alexander extended his hand when she reached him. She took it, and his fingers closed around hers with gentle strength. The priest began the ceremony. Elara heard the words as though from a great distance. "Dearly beloved, gathered here today, holy matrimony." When it came time for vows, Alexander spoke first. "I, Alexander James Ashford, take thee, Elara Catherine Thornwood, to be my wedded wife." To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. His voice was steady, his eyes never left hers. Then it was Elara's turn. She opened her mouth to repeat the traditional vows, but different words emerged, words she hadn't planned, hadn't rehearsed, but needed to say. "I, Elara Catherine Thornwood, take thee, Alexander James Ashford, to be my wedded husband. I promise to try, to trust, even when trust feels impossible, to build something good from this arrangement born of necessity. I promise to honor the sacrifice you've made, the protection you've offered, and the hope you've given me when I had none left. And I promise that if we're going to share a prison, a small, unexpected smile, we'll make it as comfortable as possible. Surprised laughter rippled through the small gathering. Even the priest's lips twitched. Alexander's eyes gleamed with something that might have been tears. That's the most honest marriage vow I've ever heard. You wanted honesty. I delivered. Yes, you did. He squeezed her hand. Thank you. The priest cleared his throat. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Ilara's heart lurched. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't planned for the moment when society demanded physical intimacy, even symbolic intimacy. Alexander seemed to sense her panic. He leaned close, lips brushing her cheek rather than her mouth, a kiss that was gentle, respectful, and utterly safe. Well done, Duchess, he murmured. You survived. We survived, she corrected. We survived, he agreed. They turned to face their tiny congregation as husband and wife. Thomas was grinning. Mary was crying happy tears. Mrs. Yates dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And Ilara thought, maybe this could work. Maybe they could build something real from this foundation of desperation and pragmatism. Maybe hope wasn't quite so dangerous after all. The wedding breakfast was held in Ravenscroft's formal dining room, an intimate affair with far too much food for the handful of guests. Ilara found herself actually hungry, her body finally beginning to trust that meals would continue, that starvation was behind her. Alexander sat beside her, playing the attentive husband for their audience. But his attention felt genuine rather than performed. He made sure her plate stayed full, refilled her tea before she asked, deflected questions that might make her uncomfortable. "You're very good at this," Ilara murmured during a lull in conversation. "At what?" "Caring for people, anticipating needs. You do it so naturally. I almost believe it's real." "It is real." Alexander's voice was quiet. "That's the problem, Ilara. I promised myself I wouldn't care, that this would be a practical arrangement with clear boundaries. But you make it damnably difficult to maintain emotional distance." Her breath caught. "Alexander." "Your Grace?" Hughes appeared at Alexander's elbow. "Forgive the interruption, but a visitor has arrived. He claims to be a relation of the Duchess, quite insistent about seeing you immediately." Dread pooled in Ilara's stomach. She had no close relations. Her mother's family had disowned her father when they married. Her father's family had cut ties over his gambling debts. "Who is it?" she asked. "A Mr. Edmund Thornwood. Says he's your father's brother." Uncle Edmund. Ilara's hands clenched on the table. She hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since he'd refused to help when her mother fell ill. "Tell him to leave," Alexander said coldly. "No." Ilara placed a hand on his arm. "I should see him. Whatever he wants, it's better to face it now." "You don't owe him anything." "I know, but he won't leave until he's said his piece. Let me handle it." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We'll see him together, in my study. Witnesses present." Edmund Thornwood was shown into Alexander's private study 15 minutes later. He was a portly man in his 50s, dressed in once fine clothes gone slightly shabby. His eyes, the same hazel as Ilara's father's, held calculation rather than affection. "Ilara, my dear niece!" He opened his arms as though expecting an embrace. "How wonderful to see you again after all these years!" She didn't move from Alexander's side. "Uncle Edmund, what do you want?" "Want? I'm here to congratulate you on your marriage. A duke, no less. Your father would be so proud." "My father is dead, and you refused to help us when he was dying." Edmund's smile faltered. Yes, well, I had my own financial difficulties, you understand. But now that you've married so well, I thought you could extract money from us, Alexander finished. His voice was glacier cold. How predictable. I'm family, Edmund protested. Surely that counts for something? Family helps when help is needed, Elara said quietly. You didn't. When we were starving, when we were about to lose our home, when I was begging every relation we had for assistance, you never responded, not once. I didn't know it was that dire. You knew. Thomas's voice came from the doorway. He must have followed them from the breakfast. You knew because Elara wrote you 3 times. She told you exactly how bad things were, and you never even replied. Edmund's face reddened. Now see here, boy. That's Master Thomas to you, Alexander interjected smoothly. And the young man is correct. You abandoned your niece and her siblings when they needed you most. You have no claim on this family now. But the Thornwood name? The Thornwood name is associated with a man who sacrificed everything for his children and died trying to protect them, Elara said. You've never lived up to it, Uncle, and you never will. Edmund's expression turned ugly. You ungrateful little… You think you're so high and mighty now, married to your duke? You were nothing. A starving girl in a broken-down cottage. Without him, you'd be in the gutter or worse. You're right, Elara agreed calmly. Without Alexander, I would have died trying to keep my siblings alive. That's what real family does, Uncle. They sacrifice, they endure, they show up when it matters. You did none of those things. I want compensation, Edmund's voice rose. Your father owed me money. Your brother owed you nothing, Alexander cut in. I've reviewed his accounts thoroughly. The only money exchanged between you was a loan you gave him 10 years ago, which he repaid in full within 6 months. You have no outstanding debts, no legal claims, and no moral standing. Hughes. The butler appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, show Mr. Thornwood out. If he returns to this property, have him arrested for trespassing. With pleasure, Your Grace. Edmund sputtered protests as Hughes escorted him firmly toward the exit, but his words faded as distance and closed doors muffled his objections. Elara sagged against Alexander's desk, adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Well, she said shakily, that was my family. Apologies for the dramatic wedding day entertainment. Don't apologize. Alexander moved closer. You were magnificent. I was furious. Magnificently furious. He hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. Are you all right? I don't know. Elara looked up at him. I thought seeing Uncle Edmund would feel worse. I thought I'd feel small again, powerless. But instead, I just felt done. Like I'd finally closed a door that should have been shut years ago. Good. Alexander's hand slid from her shoulder to gently cup her face. The gesture was intimate, tender, nothing like their careful politeness. You deserve to close doors on people who hurt you. You deserve to build new doors with people who won't. Is that what we're doing? Her voice came out whisper soft. Building something new? I'd like to try, if you're willing. Elara leaned into his touch, just slightly, just enough to communicate permission, curiosity, the beginnings of trust. I'm willing. For a moment, they stood there in the quiet study, the space between them charged with possibility. Then Thomas cleared his throat from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Yates wants to know if we're still having cake. The moment broke. Alexander dropped his hand, stepping back to respectful distance. But his eyes held promises neither of them was quite ready to speak aloud. Tell Mrs. Yates we'll be right there, Elara said. And Thomas, thank you for defending me. Always, her brother said simply. That's what family does. After he left, Ilara turned to Alexander. He's right, you know. That is what family does. And somehow, without me noticing, you became it. Careful, Duchess. Alexander's voice was rough with emotion. Talk like that, and I might start thinking this marriage could be more than a convenient arrangement. Would that be so terrible? Terrifying, actually, but possibly worth it. They returned to the wedding breakfast together, husband and wife, in truth now, bound by more than contracts and desperation. And for the first time since her father's death, Ilara felt something she'd almost forgotten, the fragile, dangerous flutter of hope taking root in her chest. She fed it carefully, the way she'd once fed her siblings, with patience, protection, and the stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, they could all survive this beautiful disaster together. The first month of marriage unfolded in careful layers. Ilara established routines, morning walks through the estate, afternoons in the library, evenings with Thomas and Mary. She was learning the rhythms of Ravenscroft Manor, the cadence of aristocratic life, the delicate dance of being a duchess. Alexander gave her space, but never distance. He appeared at breakfast each morning, asked about her plans, offered suggestions without demands. He taught Thomas to ride, commissioned a pianoforte for Mary, and treated both children like the family they'd become. And every evening he knocked on Ilara's door. Not to demand marital rights, not to encroach on her privacy, but to talk. They discussed books, politics, philosophy. They debated everything from agricultural reform to the proper way to prepare tea. They shared stories from their pasts, hers of poverty and perseverance, his of war and loss and the weight of inherited responsibility. Slowly, carefully, they were building something neither had expected: friendship. 6 weeks into their marriage, Ilara found Alexander in the estate's greenhouse, tending to roses with surprising gentleness. "I didn't know you were a gardener," she said. He looked up, surprised but pleased to see her. "Catherine loved roses. After she died, I found comfort in growing them. Something about nurturing life after causing death felt necessary." Ilara moved closer, examining the blooms. "They're beautiful. These are apothecary's roses, medieval variety, supposedly used for healing." His smile was wry. "Wishful thinking on my part." "I don't think it's wishful." Ilara touched one perfect pink blossom. "I think creating beauty from grief is its own kind of healing." Alexander set down his pruning shears. "You've been good for me, Ilara. These past weeks, having you here, watching you bloom the way you've been starving for years, it's reminded me that not everything I touch withers. You didn't wither me. You saved me. You saved yourself. I just provided resources." "No." Ilara faced him fully. "You provided hope, safety, trust, things I couldn't buy or steal or bargain for. Things that only exist when someone chooses to give them freely." He was close now, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his bark hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and carried burdens. "Ilara," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "This marriage, this arrangement, it's not enough anymore." He took a breath. "I don't want separate apartments and polite conversations and carefully maintained boundaries. I want—" He stopped, as though the words were too dangerous to release. "What do you want?" Ilara whispered. "You. I want you, not as a contract or an obligation, but as a partner, as someone I choose and who chooses me. I want to kiss you properly, not just a chaste peck in a chapel. I want to know what makes you laugh and what haunts your dreams. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms and wake up with you beside me. I want everything I swore I'd never want again." The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. "You promised," Ilara said, her voice shaking. "You promised this would be a name only, that I'd have freedom, space, no demands." "I know. And if you want to hold me to that promise, I will. I'll step back, maintain distance, be nothing more than a benevolent protector for the rest of our lives." His eyes searched hers. "But if there's any part of you, any small, hidden part that might want more, I'm asking you to consider it." Ilara's mind raced. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd protected herself against. Love meant vulnerability, meant giving someone the power to destroy you. She'd watched her mother love her father to the point of grief-induced illness. She'd felt what happened when love was followed by loss. But she'd also spent 6 weeks watching Alexander be gentle with Mary, patient with Thomas, careful with her. She'd seen him tend roses as though they were sacred. She'd felt his presence become the steady heartbeat of her days. And she'd lied to herself, pretending she didn't feel the pull between them growing stronger with each shared conversation, each almost touch, each moment when their eyes met and held just a little too long. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "So am I." Alexander took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Catherine's death nearly destroyed me. The thought of loving someone that much again, of having that much to lose, it terrifies me. But the thought of living the rest of my life at arm's length from you, that terrifies me more. What if we try and it ruins everything? What if we don't try and spend the next 50 years wondering what we missed?" He lifted her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "I'd rather risk heartbreak than guarantee loneliness. Wouldn't you?" Ilara thought of the girl she'd been 2 months ago, starving, desperate, convinced that survival meant sacrifice without reward. That girl would have said no, would have protected herself at all costs. But she wasn't that girl anymore. "Yes," she breathed. "I'd risk it." Alexander's eyes flared with hope and heat. "Are you certain?" "No, but I'm willing to try. That's what I promised at the altar, remember? To try, even when trying felt impossible." He moved closer, hands coming up to frame her face with devastating gentleness. "I'm going to kiss you now, really kiss you. If you want me to stop, don't stop." His mouth met hers softly at first, a question, a promise, a beginning. Then deeper, more urgent, as though 6 weeks of restraint had finally snapped. Ilara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and she felt his sharp inhale against her lips. This was nothing like the chaste cheek kiss at their wedding. This was fire and need and the terrifying exhilaration of free-falling into something that could destroy them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Christ," he muttered, "I've been wanting to do that since the moment you slapped Silas Crow and looked ready to burn the world down." Ilara laughed, breathless and incredulous. "That's when you knew?" "That's when I knew I was in serious trouble." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "So, where do we go from here?" "Slowly," Ilara said. "Carefully. One day at a time." "I can do slowly." "Can you?" "Well, I can try. That's all either of us can do, isn't it? Try and hope it's enough." She kissed him again, softer this time, savoring the moment. "It'll be enough. We'll make it enough." That evening, when Alexander knocked on her door for their usual conversation, Ilara didn't lead him to the sitting room. She took his hand and pulled him into her bedroom instead. "Ilara?" His voice was carefully neutral, giving her every opportunity to retreat. "Stay." The word came out more plea than command. Just stay. I don't want to sleep alone anymore. Relief and desire warred across his expression. Are you sure? I'm sure. I want to try sharing a bed with my husband. We can figure out the rest as we go. They lay together atop the covers, fully clothed, Ilara's head on Alexander's chest and his arms wrapped protectively around her. It was innocent and intimate in equal measure, the kind of closeness that spoke of trust rather than passion. "Tell me about Catherine," Ilara said quietly. "Really tell me, not just how she died, but who she was." Alexander's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. She was kind. The sort of kind that cost something, not the easy kind that's all surface pleasantness. She worked with veterans who came home from the war broken, helped them find jobs, places to live, purpose. She saw me at my worst after a particularly brutal campaign and didn't flinch from the nightmares or the guilt. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she deserved better than to die because I was too proud to take threats seriously. His arms tightened around Ilara. For a long time, I thought marrying anyone would dishonor her memory, that moving forward meant forgetting her. But she made me promise in those last moments before she died that I wouldn't spend my life alone. She said grief was meant to be survived, not enshrined. His voice roughened. I didn't understand what she meant until I met you, until I watched you survive impossible circumstances with grace and strength Catherine would have admired. Ilara tilted her head to look up at him. I'm not her. No, you're you, and I don't want you to be anyone else. He brushed hair back from her face. I loved Catherine. I'll always love her. But that doesn't mean I can't love you too. Differently, perhaps, but no less real. Love? Ilara's heart hammered. Alexander, we've only been married 6 weeks. I know. I'm not asking you to say it back. He exhaled. I'm being honest. The way you were honest at our wedding. The way we promised to be with each other. She settled back against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Strong, steady, real. Ask me again in 6 months, she said softly, after we've had time to build this thing properly, after we've weathered arguments and mishaps and all the mundane disasters marriage brings. Ask me then, and I'll give you a real answer. That's fair. But Alexander? Yes, I think I could love you. I think I'm already halfway there. I'm just too scared to admit it completely. His arms tightened around her. Then we'll walk that last half together, slowly, carefully, one day at a time, he agreed. They fell asleep like that, 2 wounded people finding comfort in shared warmth, shared honesty, shared hope that maybe, just maybe, they could heal together. Outside, roses bloomed in the greenhouse, proving that beauty could grow from grief. And inside Ravenscroft Manor, 2 hearts began the delicate, dangerous work of learning to trust again. 3 months after the wedding, London society came calling. Invitations flooded Ravenscroft Manor, balls, soirees, garden parties, dinners. The Tun was desperate to meet the mysterious bride the Duke of Ravenscroft had married without fanfare or announcement. Ilara dreaded it. Alexander, sensing her anxiety, offered an out. We don't have to go, he said over breakfast. I'm perfectly content being reclusive. You're a duke. Reclusion isn't an option. It is if I make it one. But Ilara knew the whispers would only grow louder if they continued hiding. Better to face society's judgment head-on than let speculation fester. We'll go, she decided, to the Weatherby Ball next week. Make our debut as a married couple. Get it over with. Alexander studied her. You're certain? No, but I'm going anyway. The week before the ball was spent in preparation. Madame Laurent created a gown in deep sapphire silk that made Ilara's eyes look almost luminous. Alexander commissioned jewelry, sapphires and diamonds that had belonged to his mother. "You don't have to wear them if they feel like too much," he said, presenting the set. "But I thought," he hesitated, "I wanted you to have them, to feel like you belong, even when society tries to make you feel otherwise." Alara touched the necklace, the bracelet, the earrings. They were breathtaking. They were also a clear signal to the Tun. This woman is mine. This woman matters. "They're beautiful," she said. "Thank you."